Hello, everyone. Welcome. My name is Jennifer Adams, and I'm the editor-in-chief with Knowledge Hook Signature Leadership Series. It is a pleasure to have you here with us on an October morning and afternoon and evening for some of you. Welcome. This SEL Global Leadership Series is a collaboration across 3 different organizations. Knowledge Hook is a Canadian digital math company that looks at leadership opportunities for senior education leaders, teachers, school principals. Karanga is our second partner, and it is the Global Alliance for SEL and Life Skills. It's an organization that began about 2 years ago and very committed to looking at global activities around SEL. And finally, our third partner is Salzburg Global Seminar. They are a think tank out of Salzburg, Austria. They came into being in 1947, right after the Second World War. And it was the idea of giving current and future leaders the opportunity to develop their skills to shape a better world. And no better time to be doing that than right now. So thank you to our 3 sponsors. And we are going to get started today with SEL and Youth Voice. We are very excited to have registrants from 5 Canadian provinces and territories, from 20 US states, and from 16 countries. We know that social emotional learning is a really important piece in our education systems today. And we know that what we do in our education systems, of course, is serving our youth. So it's a great topic, and very excited to have our host and our 2 panelists to lead off this discussion. I am going to introduce you to my wonderful friend, Dominic Regester. He is a fellow executive member at Karanga with me. He is also the Interim Program Lead at Salzburg Global Seminar. And Dominic, over the last couple of years, has done an amazing job hosting not only for this collaboration, but for many virtual meetings, and he does a wonderful job. So Dominic, over to you. Welcome. And I will hand it over to you to introduce Manjula and Danielle.
Thank you, Jennifer, and welcome everybody. We're really pleased that you could all make the time to join us for this conversation. Social and emotional learning has a really interesting connection with Youth Voice, and it's pretty exciting to have Manjula and Danielle as our guests for the roundtable today. Manjula and Danielle are both steering committee members for Karanga and have been involved with Karanga for many months now. And they both of their organizations do absolutely amazing work in very different and challenging contexts in different ways. So they have an enormous amount of experience and evidence from their respective programs to share, and we'll be able to think about the application of their insights in different contexts around the world. This is also exciting for us because this is a conversation that began at UN General Assembly a couple of weeks ago, when the 3 of us, along with 2 other guests, were part of a diplomatic courier and Qatar Foundation organized program looking at youth voice in different fora as part of UN General Assembly. And we felt that we got so far in that conversation, but there was a lot more that could be said and that we could share. And so we were excited to have the opportunity to continue it through the SEL Leadership Series. Qatar Foundation's involvement in the UN General Assembly program was also connected to the major theme for WISE's summit in Doha in December of this year, which WISE are calling Generation Unmute. And is part of a bigger program of activity looking at the importance of youth voice. We were really interested when we were thinking about how to frame this. You know, obviously, and I mean this with no disrespect to Manjula and Danielle, but none of us really qualify as youth anymore. But in different ways, Manjula and Danielle's programs are very much about equipping young people with the skills that they will need so that when the opportunity to express their opinions, to move into decision-making fora, to exercise agency, become available. They're not thrown in at the deep end. They've had some experience. They've developed a certain skill set that will allow them to operate effectively in that kind of environment. Social and emotional skills are a critical part of that, which is, also one of the things that unites all of our different areas of work. When we started thinking about Karanga and the core purpose of Karanga, there were, and this is certainly how I remember it, there were 5 kind of dominant arguments that we were exploring around the value of social and emotional learning, and why social and emotional learning was such an important education reform topic. So there is, there is a kind of economic employability argument where you think about the skills that young people need to develop now so that they can do the kinds of jobs that won't be automated or outsourced to AI in the near future. There is equally, legitimately and compellingly, there is a sort of mental health and well-being argument in the abundance of evidence that looks at how the early introduction of social and emotional learning programs can help young people grow up with the kind of mental architecture that will let them navigate later life mental health challenges or support them in navigating that. There is also a kind of community cohesion and identity and belonging vector within social and emotional learning, and lots of evidence that shows how SEL programs help young people develop their own sense of self, their own sense of belonging, so that they can contribute actively and effectively to different kinds of community. There is, I think, equally legitimately a sort of education attainment value for social and emotional learning. There is good evidence that shows how SEL interventions have a benefit for all students in terms of academic output, but they have a particular benefit for students growing up in different kinds of disadvantage. And finally, a more, I suppose in some ways more hypothetically or experimentally, because we're not there yet, there is a growing body of analysis that looks at the kinds of skills that populations and communities will need to have in greater abundance than we currently do, if we're to have any chance of addressing the sorts of challenge that the Sustainable Development Goals are looking to mitigate against by the end of this decade, by 2030. So I thought starting with the Sustainable Development Goals might be an interesting place to begin. And it would be, interesting to kind of jump straight in with Danielle and Manjula and ask them how they see their different programs connect with Sustainable Development Goal challenges. What we'll then do is that Danielle's going to give a short presentation talking in a bit more depth about her work, which is mainly with younger primary school or early years children. And we'll then have a chance to bring in questions from the audience and from Manjula and I for Danielle about her work. And we'll then pivot to educate Lanka and Manjula's work, which is generally with slightly older learners, so with teenagers, and again, bring in as many questions as we can from the audience. But if we could begin with that sort of top level opening question about the Sustainable Development Goals and how you see your work connecting with them. And Danielle, maybe we could start with you and then move to Manjula, and then we'll go into your presentation, okay?
Sounds great. Thank you so much, Dominic. Very happy to be here. Well, so thank you so much for having me. I think this is such a timely conversation and just a perfect continuation from the initial conversation that we had during UNGA. So how does our work tie into the Sustainable Development Goals? And I'll go in a little bit more into the practical implementation of our work, but I just think it's important to connect that theory and practice. And so our work in particular touches on 5 of the Sustainable Development Goals: good health and well-being, gender equality, quality education, peace, justice, and strong institutions, and partnership for the goals. Now, so what do we do, right? And how does that tie in? So at Amal Alliance, we empower displaced and disenfranchised children through 4 pillars of support. So we provide social emotional learning, psychosocial support, early childhood development, and peace education. And we house this in what we call our rainbow of education. So this is a trauma-informed, play-based model that supports holistic development. And so not only do we teach just fundamental skills, but we teach it in a very playful and fun manner. So we include everything from kids yoga to mindfulness, play, art therapy, dance, and basically all things fun. And so the idea is that each skill or competency is linked with a color. So for instance, red is the color of emotions, and blue is the color of empathy, and yellow is harmony. And so as children go through the different colors of the rainbow, they learn these foundational and interpersonal skills. We work primarily with refugee, displaced populations. So prior to COVID, we were working in Greece, Lebanon, and Turkey. We always work with local partners because we think it's so important to, 1, tap into the local expertise, understand the cultures and the norms, and make sure that the content is really conducive to enhancing the work that they're already doing. So not replacing anything, but supplementing it and complementing in a way that really helps the development of the child. Because if we, ensure that the kids get quality programming, not only are they going to thrive in a school environment, but they're really going to thrive in life. So now, Rainbow of Education, COVID hits, all classes were suspended and we had to pivot. Now, how do you pivot if most of the children that you serve really don't have access to the internet, don't have tablets or lots of resources? So you can't just switch over to an online world like many locations, did. I'm based in the United States, which was much more easy pivot into sort of the online dimension. So we were very fortunate to have won the UNHCR COVID-19 challenge. And we were able to take our Rainbow program and create more of a hybrid approach that brings in an ed tech dimension, but entirely focused on social and emotional learning. So really the well-being factor. These are our culturally sensitive, non-gendered blobs. As the children go through the different elements of the program, the blobs reenact whatever they're learning. So it brings a visual component, which is rather nice. And so it works on a learning management system ideally. So for instance, you have an audio component, which is your teacher, and I'm using teacher here very loosely because a parent can facilitate the class. You can have someone from a community leader facilitate the class. So essentially the audio now guides whoever is facilitating the class into what the topic of the day may be. So perhaps you might be talking about emotions or self-management or social awareness. And so you'll get an audio, hello, welcome, blah, blah, blah. And then it gives you some instructions and then a visual component to guide you into the activity. So essentially the children go on this color journey. So kind of relating back to our original concept of the rainbow, each colored cloud is a competency. So all of our red clouds are about self-awareness, all of our orange clouds are self-management. And so for children to go from one cloud to the next, they need to acquire their token. And this now becomes like a fun game. You want to find your token to get to the next cloud. But in order to get your token, you must complete all your activities. And so that the kids they're playing, they're laughing, but they're really learning, and they're learning key skills in just a very joyful manner. Now, let's see. Okay, I'm not sure what happened there. So I thought there was another slide, but no. So basically, the program in itself was created during COVID as this adaptation that I mentioned, and it was piloted in Bangladesh. And what was interesting was that our results were more phenomenal than we could have ever had expected. And so in essence, we saw a 16.5% increase in the well-being of the kids in only 10 weeks time. 99% of the caregivers, the teachers noted that the children had more positive mood, better pro-social behavior, there was more teamwork, and they were really ready to learn. So even though our program in itself didn't really address the learning aspects of, literacy, math, science, it really did have this secondary effect into how they were learning. They were more focused, they were ready, they were excited to learn. And I think this addresses one of those issues that oftentimes you may see that child has a learning barrier, but the learning barrier may very well be just that they're dealing with anxiety or they're depressed. And this is personifying as a learning barrier, when in essence, they really just need to learn how to more effectively manage whatever emotion they're feeling so they can constructively communicate that and then achieve higher academic success and progress. But yeah, so I just want to go back to the SDGs. So when you think of the SDGs, we really try to address youth and youth voice in a very, very holistic manner. So when you think of gender equality in Bangladesh, it was a bit more challenging to get girls attending some of the programs and boys. So we really made the model more conducive to bringing girls into the education spaces so that they would have a more of an equal opportunity. In terms of quality education, we work with populations that don't necessarily have access. And so the first step is really just getting them access to any learning, whether it be in a attended school or in a non-formal system, to then hopefully integrate them into that formal learning pathway, which will set them up for employability and all sorts of other successes in life. But we really, really rely on the SDG number 17, which is partnership. no one can do this alone. And I think when organizations work in silos, it's really a disadvantage to the children and whoever it is that you're serving, because we all bring a core competency and a strength. And if we can build on those strengths, we really create programming that's not only holistic in nature, but also just better implemented, more successful. You create a feedback loop from the community to understand what aspects of the programming are useful and what might not be working and needs to be revamped, or what you could integrate and add in and share across cultures to start building bridges of peace and tolerance and acceptance. I don't want to go on too long, so I know we have a lot of other conversations to tap into, but I do want to mention that we work with very, very, very young children. So we start from early childhood, from around 3 to 6, as well as primary, which is kind of our sweet spot. And a lot of times, the earlier years are overlooked, and those are so critical in the formation of the child. But then also, we can't expect children to just jump in primary when, you know, they might not have the foundation in the early years. So we're very, very adamant to advocate for inclusion of these programs from a very, very, very the youngest age possible, because children are forming, they're developing, they're, you know, not only the cognitive, the social, the emotional, all of these other skills. And so we really need to kind of sediment a very strong foundation so that they can become these powerful agents of change when they grow up, and then share these learnings with the subsequent generation. And I'll stop there. Dominic, I'm not sure if you want to switch over to someone else or take questions, so over to you.
No, I think it would be great to spend a bit more time talking about your program, if that's okay.
Okay.
Your program, Amal's work is mainly with 7 to 12-year-olds, sorry.
Yes.
And you're kind of expanding the scope of it to work with younger learners as well.
Well, we worked with younger learners prior to the pandemic, but unfortunately with the pandemic, we did have to shift. And now we've been focusing on the primary age group with Colors of Kindness. It's currently in the process of being adapted for the earlier years, since we have all this massive rainbow content for the early years. But yes, right now our primary focus is at primary 7 to 12.
And do you focus on particular social and emotional skills within that training?
Yes, we aligned ourselves to the CASTLE framework. We really like to use a lot of universal language, because oftentimes you see life skills, you know, all these transferable skills, so many different terms, and everyone's really referring to the same actual skills. So our main focus is actually the 5 main skills from CASTLE. So self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, responsible decision-making, and relationship building. We've added a 6th skill, which is creativity. So we really do explore creativity and curiosity, because we've seen, especially from the studies from ECD and other data, that these are just really good skills that foment other types of learning that, you know, improve mathematics and literacy and whatnot. But those are sort of our main focal points.
And so with lots of those domains, and you know, the 6th of creativity, there's obviously a kind of direct correlation, isn't it, with the sorts of skills that people need to be able to shape their own agency. And I think I should have perhaps said at the beginning that for the purposes of this conversation, I think we are using student voice and student agency interchangeably. We're talking about the same basic things, aren't we? It's the, you know, the belief that, you know, that students have I think in the OECD framing from their recent report, it's the belief that students have the will and the ability to positively influence their own lives and the world around them, and that you can set a goal and then work towards that goal. And so the student voice is about that, isn't it, essentially?
Yeah, and for instance, that's something that we focus on tremendously. So for instance, in the cloud of, actually, I don't know which cloud it is, but while we're teaching sort of responsible decision making, we use an exercise, which I'm particularly fond of, which is building this tower of success. And so in the ideal classroom, you would use 5 bricks, so like Legos. But if you don't have Legos, you could draw your own bricks, or you could just draw some sort of different colored bricks. And so the idea is that each of them represent something. So for instance, clarity or support or motivation. And there's no wrong order to place your bricks. But so what we ask the children is say, okay, like envision your goal. You have this goal in mind. Now, how are you going to achieve it? How are you going to place your bricks to create your tower of success? And so all the kids will place them, and then they'll place them in different orders. But then we share about why everyone placed it in this order. And then that's really where the learning happens. Because at that point, some children might say, well, I chose clarity up top because I have to have a really clear idea. And then I chose planning because then I can plan and yada, yada, yada. But some other child might have said, well, I actually started with support because I needed to have a really strong support system. And then I planned, and then I, was very clear in my direction. And so as they start to share, they really learn that there's no wrong way to place these bricks. But if they have a very focused plan of action and they stick to it, then they are going to be able to achieve their goals. And like this exercise and activity, we do all other types of things. But this one's just a very easy one to visualize because especially if you have the bricks, they stack them and they see the colors. And it's just a fun way to see that there's no wrong way in doing it. But also they start rethinking, well, maybe I should have put motivation first. Like, how can I, rethink how I'm going to prioritize my goals? But to answer your question, I mean, it's really the first block, going back to the block, it's really the first block, the first foundational step of understanding that nothing is out of their reach. It's just how to establish that thinking process and how they're going to get there, and what motivation or intrinsical factors they need that aren't external, but internal, that can help them to achieve whatever it is that they have ahead of them.
And that all of these things are, in many ways equally important. You want them all in your arsenal, don't you, as your, and that's why, I think that's why there's almost, without wanting to become pious about it, there's a really, I think, important moral purpose to this, that, there is a moral responsibility that if we all sincerely believe in the importance of youth voice, that you're helping young people develop those skills before you put them in an arena in which they're given the opportunity to exercise that voice. Otherwise, it's sort of tokenism, and that doesn't really help anyone.
Well, and even just maybe in a step back, so the children that we focus on many times are in refugee camps, and they're stuck there on 17 years on average. I mean, this is a massive amount of time. These children have already endured horrors, whether, they had to flee because of a conflict or a natural disaster. They've experienced trauma before arriving at their destination, and now they're in this new location. They don't speak the language. It's unfamiliar. Most of the time there's xenophobia. And if you don't provide them these opportunities to just have access to any type of education, they're really sitting ducks for security risks. So anything from human trafficking, exploitation, to being recruited by terrorist organizations. So by making sure that they do have access, you're not only mitigating those security risks, but you're actually giving them an opportunity for a future. Because what is their future if they're going to be sitting in a camp for the majority of their formative years? And then are they going to be employable? Well, likely no.
So that kind of comes back to that initial framing in some ways, doesn't it, about the idea of social emotional learning. Social and emotional skills are an absolutely legitimate component of the response to multiple challenges that societies and communities around the world are facing. And there's as much need for them in the really challenging contexts in which Amal Alliance is working in refugee education contexts as there is for people working in affluent middle-class suburbs, for want of a better contrast.
Well, and a lot of, I believe it was Microsoft that put forth a report a couple of years ago that a lot of what the corporations are looking for, so the jobs of the future, are in fact more aligned with these social and emotional skills. And so even if perhaps they may not have the strongest literacy background or mathematical background, at least we're providing them those foundational skills that will help them provide for their families at a later time. And those skills are important because if you have endured all this trauma, you need to heal. So one of the things that, you know, right now with the pandemic, I think has really shown light is our education crisis has now turned into this mental health crisis. And even if children return to school, we really don't know what the ramifications are going to be, because children have just now undergone all sorts of trauma. And this is not just refugee children. This is essentially every child that has, you know, had to switch over to virtual school or Zoom school or whatnot. And so we really have to help them get ready to learn, to bridge those learning losses and make sure that they're at their, you know, they're able to achieve their full potential.
And the earlier, you know, there's a kind of legitimate comparison with you know, with sort of muscle memory, isn't it? The earlier you begin to introduce the opportunities to exercise and practice these skills, the more adept you can become at them. I think that's been one of the, you know, one of the most valuable insights in this field in the last decade or two, that these are skills that can be taught, they're skills that can be learned and that you can improve upon.
Exactly. And I mean, they really complement the traditional structures well. So, you know, it would be unrealistic, although it would be ideal to revamp all of our education systems. Realistically, that's not feasible in the immediate future, but you can supplement it and include it in ways that, you know, aren't taxing to the teachers, who are also struggling with, now they have all these new different challenges that, you know, they didn't have about a year and a half ago. And then now the children are experiencing all this anxiety. So just ways of integrating into lesson plan that, for instance, like taking a mindful moment and just using our breath. Everyone has their breath. And if they can figure out how to channel their breath to relax their nervous system, well, then they're more focused for the, you know, the hour ahead of them. Or just taking, you know, a moment to stretch and move, just to kind of channel that energy. And, you know, get off the computer. And so, I mean, there's little ways that can be integrated without having to have a formal, you know, program and figuring out how to insert it and how it complements something, but just little aspects that eventually will trickle and make for a greater, you know, learning experience.
When you're, you know, when you were working with, you mentioned the program with the Rohingya in Bangladesh earlier, is that a program where you're offering this as a kind of complete curriculum, or are you integrating it into an existing curriculum that other organizations or ministry are deploying?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. So the Rohingya test was actually really unusual because it was in the peak of the pandemic where children were still out of school. So we were very fortunate as the children were starting to transition back to implement. UNICEF had lent us their centers, and through Friendship NGO and all these other wonderful partners on the ground, we tested it in a small group. So it was still in person, very, very small groups, all social distanced. You know, it's very hard actually to play without touching. You'd be surprised how many children's games you touch. So just to make it socially distanced was a challenge in itself. But so we did that, and we did it as not a standalone situation. It was 1 hour a week. And it was almost to complement anything else. So it works best if it's in tandem with a program that's, you know, focusing on literacy, numeracy, or those hard sciences. But it just adds on. So we always say, like, have it, you know, the hour before or the hour after, and you include it, and then you give the children a challenge. So it's really homework per se without calling it homework. And so they have this challenge to take home with them for the rest of the week. And it always engages the family and the siblings. So in a way, what they're learning, they're taking home. And then to get that token for the next cloud, they have to kind of share, you know, how they explored this challenge. And it just becomes a fun game of sorts. But they also take it home, and now they're implementing it through the course of the week, even though they only have 1 hour of instruction with us.
So it kind of permeates across, and you know, I think one of the other things that is really important to say at the moment is that there's more and more evidence coming through that shows how the acquisition of social and emotional skills reinforces the acquisition of academic attainment. That, you know, and this is again, I keep mentioning the OECD report just because I was doing some things with them yesterday, but there's so much evidence in that shows how the development of social and emotional skills is really valuable for improved academic outcomes. So with your approach, where you're layering the colors of kindness on top of existing curricula, it's reinforcing academic outcomes.
Well, and that kind of goes back to the SDGs, because it would be very unrealistic of us to approach a Ministry of Education and say, hey, we want to revamp your curriculum. they would probably say like, okay, thanks for visiting. This was a fun conversation. But if you offer it in a way that's very easily applicable for the teachers and for the schools and the districts, then it's really a win-win for everyone, because at this point, the teachers, they don't need to learn all sorts of new material, because the podcast really becomes kind of the teacher. They just need to facilitate it, but they do need to understand why it's being taught, which is why I'm always very, I always strain the fact that we do need to train the teachers, because if someone doesn't understand the concepts of the skills that we're teaching, then the whole teaching is going to get lost. Or if they're not taking good care of themselves, self-care is super important. That's going to trickle into how the kids are learning. So a lot of the training is really just like, okay, let's really understand the basis of these skills, and also where are we at ourselves, so that we can effectively communicate this down to the kids. But it's so easy to implement. I mean, literally, it's almost like a click and go, and the blobs do the rest of it. So it's just fun.
And where is it being used at the moment?
So we piloted in Bangladesh. We're launching in Uganda, hopefully by the end of the month. We're just waiting for our last permits there. And we're going to be launching in Greece in January. And we're very excited actually, because we're going to be conducting an evidence-based model to really look at this case study and foment the evidence, because it's actually quite lacking in education in emergencies. So hopefully this type of model will then create sort of a base for others to go on and be able to use such learnings.
That's amazing. Thank you so much for sharing all of that. And I think, to reinforce the point that we made earlier, that, these kinds of interventions, whether it's colors of kindness or, or something analogous that you can offer to children as young as 7 or even younger, they're really important foundational development opportunities for the opportunity to exercise these kinds of skills when they're slightly older, and there are more opportunities to bring students into decision-making spaces. And Manjula, I'd love to kind of turn to you now, if that's okay. And your Educate Lanka typically work with slightly older children, don't you, with teenagers, and so there's a kind of different focus on the role that social and emotional skills can play in helping them exercise their own agency and bring their voice into different fora. But we'd love to learn more. Please.
Thanks, Dominic. Thanks, Danielle, for that wonderful presentation and really useful insights, really to understand the early childhood, the importance of SEL in that age group. And we experience that directly. As Dominic said, we focus on students from 13 to 25. So having that foundation when they make it to their teens is critically important. And we see that a lot when that is missing, how much more of an effort and interventions are needed at a later stage in life for a teenager or youth or even an adult to integrate and instill those skills in their life. Before I get into the sort of the example and provide Educate Lanka's work, let me just give a little bit of a background of myself. I was born and raised in Sri Lanka. I moved to the States when I was 19. I was an investment banker, and about 10 years ago, that's a nice art. I started Educate Lanka as sort of a side initiative to contribute back to Sri Lanka by realizing this, while there's plenty of talent in the country under a universal education system, opportunity to succeed is not equal for everyone. And this realization was I understood and experienced this while growing up in Sri Lanka. I saw many who didn't have the same access to similar quality education that I had because, luckily my parents were privileged enough to provide me with a good education and send me to the United States for my higher education, but not everyone had those opportunities for learning. Realizing this gap, we created this online platform to identify these socioeconomically marginalized students with high potential and with plenty of talent, to provide them with funding access through long-term micro scholarships as in the form of direct cash transfers, so that they could remain in education system in the school without having to drop out because of out-of-pocket expenses for education. While we have a wonderful universal education system in Sri Lanka, out-of-pocket expenses has become the #1 reason for families to pull students out of school and put them into workforce, or pull them out so that a sibling can attend and continue their education. So the model that we initiated, this micro scholarship platform, connecting the Sri Lankan students with Sri Lankans living abroad, the diaspora, so that their education would be funded from secondary all the way through completion of higher education, was really impactful to the level that I ended up switching my career from investment banking and going full-time as a social entrepreneur about 9 years ago. Through our impact, we started realizing, though, there's another gap in our education system, which is the learning and the skills gap. We saw in our own students who would academically qualify and obtain those degrees and qualifications ended up being underemployed or unemployed because those academic qualifications didn't really meet the demands of the workforce. Or from the past socio-political context of Sri Lanka, you would realize that they don't meet the demands of the society either. So there was this significant gap that we realized that we need to achieve in order to provide that the impact that we envisioned from our organization. So we created this complementary learning pathway, realizing that we remain with our students for up to 12 years. We had an opportunity to provide them a learning pathway outside the classroom to acquire these learning opportunities that they would not normally would have within the classroom or within the formal education curriculum. And when we provided this learning pathway, we brought in stakeholders from local as well as global, because education, in my view, is a responsibility of all stakeholders, not just one stakeholder. The governments and the public sector hasn't been really been able to deliver the quality education at an equitable and inclusive level. And we realize that we are seeing more and more the private sector, the business community, the industries and the employers playing an active role, because they are the recipient of the talent pool and the pipeline of students coming out of the education systems. So we leveraged this interest from all stakeholders and created a multi-stakeholder approach to provide them, our students, with outside the classroom learning experiences, especially focused on social emotional skills and exposure and global citizenship skills. So let me share an example related to the topic of today's session, youth agency and taking actions on sustainable development goals. All right, so this Educate Lanka Youth Change Agents program, it's a 1-year pilot that we conducted earlier this year in partnership with the US Embassy in Sri Lanka through one of their public diplomacy grants. And as I mentioned, this was a multi-stakeholder, public-private, global-local collaboration. We brought in the public sector, the US Embassy, the American Center for their funding to implement this pilot. We brought in the private sector, the industry, the employers for training, bringing their trainers and curriculum that they provide to their new hires and employees to provide our students the training curriculums. And then we brought in resources and curriculums from the international community. The Smithsonian Science Education Center collaboration is a significant one for us. This is the first time that we collaborated with them on their curriculums and modules for global goals. It's highly recommended that everyone as an educator would look into that. They have these wonderful self-learning modules on sustainable development goals that a learner, a young person could learn by themselves by going through those self-learning curriculums and taking action at a personal level. And we have these global partnerships with other schools and institutions where we exchange resources and connected our students with that global community. And then we brought in the local, the civil society and the local educators for their training and the curriculums. Of course, we have developed some of our own curriculums as well for this program. And through the 1-year program, over the last 6 months, we have trained our students on foundational social emotional skills. We trained them on entrepreneurial and leadership skills and professional development skills. And over the last couple of months, we have trained them specifically on design thinking skills for them to motivate them to identify an issue in their own community that is related to them personally or to their family or to their community, and develop a globally relevant solution for that issue that they've identified. The whole exercise of design thinking is for them to understand a specific issue and then think of this, from a human-centered perspective, to design a solution that would be then relevant, not just for that own local context, but globally as well. And currently we have connected them with youth from outside the country, their counterparts, peers, similar age from 16 to 22, for them to provide that global perspective and feedback and insights from outside of their communities. And this is the first time some of these students are connected to someone from the outside of their community in their entire lives. And this would provide them with that global exposure, the perspectives and insights for them to refine and develop their solutions beyond the local context, and also for them to understand that some of these issues are not just related or specific to their own context. These are global issues that they are experiencing, especially during time of COVID. And there are others who are going through similar issues, and there are solutions that have been done in other parts of the world that they could use as examples to build their own solutions. And we didn't stop there. Over the next 3 to 4 months, they're going to actually implement these solutions on the ground. So over this 1-year period, we provided them with those foundational training. And because of COVID, we had to switch completely virtual. We had planned this to be a hybrid pedagogy, but then we had to pivot 100% virtual. We made sure that we build that infrastructure, the technology infrastructure and connectivity, so that these students who wouldn't have otherwise access to online learning or access would have that access in the beginning, and provide our training and self-learning curriculums so that they would still be able to access those learnings, and then individually be able to take action in their own communities, which is the most critical part of this, through that design thinking training, and actually then implement those solutions on the ground with the help of their global counterparts. This is what it looks like. Because of COVID, a lot of this has been virtual delivery. And as you see, because of the pivot to virtual environments and self-learning, learning seemed to happen everywhere. It could be in their farms where they would implement those solutions. It's self-learning through those, the Smithsonian curriculums. It's virtual, training and Zoom training through our corporate partners. And a lot of it relates to their own sort of self-learning as well. And throughout this, pilot, what we expect is to have a blueprint of a multi-stakeholder approach that could then be scaled and replicated outside of our, the communities that we implemented across nationally in Sri Lanka, as well as in other contexts outside the country as well. And finally, when we're talking about education reimagined and future of education, we as an organization focus on 5 key objectives. And these are not just objectives, but they also act as guiding principles for us. And we make sure that these principles are focused not just as an organization, but in every project, intervention, and program that we implement. Starting with shifting education's purpose from acquisition of knowledge towards a collective purpose of maximizing well-being. This is critically important because if we don't get the purpose right, when we reimagine education, everything else that we do, from curriculums to pedagogies to platforms and assessment and measurements, they are not going to be correctly aligned and guided. And that has been a key problem of a lot of the education issues that we, not just in Sri Lanka, but in many contexts, the education systems are facing. The whole child development, take a focus on whole child development approach, not just focus on cognitive skills or one aspect of learning, and focus on a learning model that prepares a young person to thrive and succeed beyond school and work, set them for life as globally conscious citizens in a diverse and interconnected world. The learning has to be learner-centered, personalized, and ubiquitous. It cannot be mass-produced as we used to do in the past. Learning cannot be restricted to, within four walls of a building, as we see, and experience through COVID. And it has to be multi-stakeholder. One party cannot take the responsibility and be responsible for delivering an equal and inclusive education for everyone. And technology can be used as an enabler. For being social emotional learning to be center and the foundation of learning and pedagogy. And Danielle made a great point for this, how SEL can really build those foundational skills for someone to then build that technical skills and academic knowledge on top, so that they could decide what path and what technical skills and what career paths that they would choose, and also be ready and to succeed in life. Because what you learn in school is not just important to get a job. What you learn in school and what you learn in any learning environment needs to set you up for life. Finally, which is the most critical aspect of our organization, focused on the social, the marginalized and the underprivileged, is making sure that every learning that we reimagine for the future is going to be inclusive and equitable for all. We have 250 million students out of school right now. There are 250 more million who leave education system without secondary and secondary level skills and learning outcomes. So we cannot continue to introduce new learning environments unless we make sure that those learning environments are inclusive and equitable for everyone, and we don't leave anyone behind.
That was brilliant, Manjula. Thank you. Thank you very much. I feel like I've heard you talk about Education Lanka's work on, I've been lucky enough to hear you talk about it on a number of occasions, and I feel like I get a different takeaway each time. There's sort of a different thing that resonates, and I don't think I'd fully appreciated the scope of the work that you're doing with the Smithsonian before. And and I think it's interesting. Danielle, you mentioned something as well, didn't you, about the kind of how you're closing out the weekly lessons with a challenge to the students to think about learning outside of the classroom. And that feels like a really important trend in education, more broadly, thinking about the connection between what happens in school and its application in the real world, or where you can learn. Manjula, did you find, sort of because of school closures and everything last year, with all the chaos and the disruption that the pandemic caused, that there was an acceleration of interest in that aspect of Educate Lanka's programming?
Yeah, no, definitely, Dominic. And I think all of Sri Lanka's students have not been in school for the last more than 12 months now, regardless of your status, and because we were not prepared for virtual education as a country. And the marginalized have been even severely impacted because they wouldn't even have access to basic, virtual platforms. So that really provided us an opportunity to tap into this age group of students who are idle at home, who are thriving for, eagering for learning, any type of learning and any type of curriculums and modules. So that really opened up this window of reaching students from age 16 to 22, a broad range. Whereas if we were to implement a program in the past, we would, a program of a nature of 1 year or more, we would select students who are in transition periods from secondary to higher education, or waiting for acceptance to their university admissions, which now takes up to 18 months in Sri Lanka, where students normally stay home idling. And those are the times that we normally focus on. But because of COVID, I think we were able to reach to a more wider age range of students.
Because you're working with slightly older learners or students, do you how much do you create environments that let them test these kinds of behaviors or these kinds of skills? Like, do you think about that idea of safe places to fail as a way of how do you do that dress rehearsal before you're actually put in a position where you can exercise authority or voice?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. When we bring students to this, it's not just about getting training them and asking them to do something and put them in action. It's a process of engaging them from our even through our micro scholarship intervention. It's not just about a cash transfer. It's about really working with them and making sure that they are aware that there's they have that confidence and assurance that there's someone responsible to ensure that the next year of their education is secured, right? In that way, they find that a mentor, a counterpart who can they rely on. And through that, we try to get them engaged, like get their feedback, get their to listen to their issues, to listen to their voices in designing our interventions. So some of these programs that we've designed, including the Youth Change Agents program, had been informed by our own students, the interest to learn these type of sort of skills. And when we collectively had those focus group sessions with our students and our stakeholders, local educators, they all sort of directed us to focus on this foundational SEL. And that's one of the reasons that Educate Lanka as an organization, we are also creating our own SEL sort of a framework around empowerment, citizenship, and leadership. And when we design these projects, we bring them as one of the key stakeholders, our own youth. And a lot of the youth who have completed these programs then participate as trainers and facilitators. And that has happened in this program, where some of our alumni are the coordinators for these students on the ground at the community level.
And I think Jennifer and I both had the opportunity to participate in one of the global citizenship conferences that you organized a couple of years ago, where again, it's that idea of helping young people practice these skills, or the kind of public manifestation of these kinds of behaviors in a safe space, right? A place where it is safe to kind of mess it up and fail, because you learn from that, before you're kind of given the authentic opportunity, as it were. Yeah,
something interesting that we did for the first time through this initiative is to connect them to their peers and counterparts from outside the country. So this is where we engage the Sri Lankan diaspora, who are young diaspora. We engaged about 70 of them with the 30 youth agents as a coach and a mentor for them to spend 2 months providing feedback on their solutions and their presentations, and practice those pitches and build confidence and be able to exchange those ideas with another 17-year-old who's living in Washington, D.C. or Toronto or in London. Yeah. And that really allowed them to build that relationship, have that engagement outside, and that will give them the confidence for them to then not just to present and pitch that idea, but to then go ahead and implement it, because they now know they have validation from not just their immediate family or the trainer, but from stakeholders outside their communities as well.
Dominic, I can't resist jumping in based on your comments about these skills developing later in age. And I think, in my involvement with the OECD study on social emotional skills, they did a massive meta-analysis of how social emotional skills develop. And I think that one of the pieces that was the most foundationally kind of earth-shattering to me was that it's actually proven that they develop over time. And unlike cognitive skills, that there's a real burst early in early age children, these continue to develop all the way through adolescence and well into adulthood. And I know when I spoke about SEL in our school system, that was really reassuring to secondary school teachers and principals, knowing that they had a role to play and that they could actually help those students develop them over time. And I think it's really interesting, Manjula, with your program, is it's really taking youth at those ages and helping them develop those skills. And the only other thing that I'd mention based on that OECD study is that it's very obvious that those skills don't just develop in a school system, in a school setting. They develop in extracurriculars, they develop in the community, they develop in the homes, and every one of those opportunities that you're giving to those students to be interacting with other students outside of their local setting is just a feeding ground for those skills to be developing. So it's fascinating. And I think that's something every one of us that are participating in the roundtable today, we can see a place where how we can help our students, whatever context they're in, develop those skills.
Especially because they tail off so significantly between the ages of 10 and 15. So that's one of the big findings from the new study, is that, yeah, in terms of self-reported results, then 15-year-olds have consistently, and it's true across socioeconomic background, it's true across gender, it's true across migrant or native born, however it's characterized in the report.
One thing, with focus on SEL is that, there's saying that empathy received is empathy practiced.
Yeah.
Right? And we see that a lot in our students. When we provide them that assurance and confidence and empathy, they pay it forward. And that's part of the commitments of all Educate Lanka scholars who sign up, is to pay it forward and give back. And we see that in action, and not through these projects, but also in, as they go into the workforce and the society as alumni. They come back as a sponsor and sponsor another person's education, because that's a way of them giving back the support that they got. So these are, actions and actions of a globally conscious citizen that we want to see, not just someone with an academic degree, but someone who actually makes a positive difference.
It's also, in democratic societies, it's not just student voice, I suppose, where it's kind of the individual voice in a decision in a kind of learning environment for them. It's also about the moral responsibility that comes with growing up in a democracy, isn't it? And you want, if there's, interesting experiments in different parts of the world looking at lowering the age at which you can exercise your right to vote. And you think, again, there's a kind of an amazing opportunity for everyone who's involved in education to create more opportunities for young people to fail forward, and also to learn from, to put this into practice and then see the consequences of decisions. I've seen the time. I've been dreadful as a moderator because I've been enjoying talking with you both so much. But thank you so much for sharing what you're doing. Both your organizations do absolutely spectacular work. And I think there is, there's an amazing opportunity to apply insights that you've been able to develop in, whether it's in Bangladesh or in refugee education context, or in Sri Lanka, globally, in all the contexts in which the audience who are joining us today are working. So, Danielle and Manjula, it's a pleasure to have the chance to work with you, and obviously to be friends with you both. And thank you so much for giving of your time and sharing your expertise and being part of this today.
Thank you. And Manjula, always I love hearing about your organization. So
likewise, Danielle, thank you. It was a pleasure. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much to the three of you, and I can't believe how the time has flown by. And to the participants, great questions and great comments, and I think we all got a lot out of it. And for those of you that are from a math background, I know I had a few people that were making comments. Knowledge does have a math leadership series where they dive closely and more deeply into great pedagogical practices for math teachers and math leaders. So you're welcome to join up there. Lots of resources there that are free and you can access. Secondly, back to signature leadership. If you jump on the portal, again, it's knowledgehook.com/leadership, and you will see all the on-demand videos for past roundtables. There is lots on the topic of SEL as well. There's a whole section on podcasts with some great speakers there. And one of those speakers is Santiago Rincon Gallardo, and I'm not sure how many people will have seen Santiago's work. He works very closely with Michael Fullan, and he has a great book out on liberating learning, educational change as social movement, and he talks a lot about youth, democracy, social emotional learning, and giving kids the skills to be able to create education systems that make sense in the world that we're in now. So highly suggest that you take a look at that one. You can see them on any of the places that you usually get your podcasts. And finally, we have our next roundtable coming up is on leadership for equity in education. And it is with Pasi Salzburg. Most of you know he is an amazing Finnish academic who is now working at the University of New South Wales in Australia. And Alison Scarrett, who is from the University of Texas, Austin. And this one is in the evening because of Pasi and where he is in Australia. So please join us there, and you can see where you can register. So just a final word. Thank you so much, Manjula and Danielle and Dominic. A great session, and we look forward to seeing and hearing about your work in the future. Take care, everyone. Have a great day.